Hello, Matthew Bell with AlzheimersProof.com, and today I wanted to expand on a topic that I've discussed previously on the channel, but I've also written about it on the website. And this is going to get into some of the driving laws in the United States, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more in depth. And the main reason is because every state is a little bit different. But there are two overarching differences that are probably the most relevant ones to tackle first. So what I have in mind is the difference between a mandatory reporting state and a non-mandatory reporting state. Now, in a mandatory reporting state, it's just like what it sounds. The state somehow requires that doctors report to the Motor Vehicle Bureau or Division of Motor Vehicles or the Department of Transportation or whatever actual state level agency it is that is handling driver's licensing. In a mandatory reporting state, the state requires that doctors bring to the attention of that licensing body any driver who might suffer some kind of cognitive impairment or disability that would affect their ability to safely operate a motor vehicle. And a non-mandatory reporting state is going to be a state in which there is no such requirement laid upon doctors. The first thing it's important to understand, and I'm going to get into greater detail in this in another video, is that even in a non-mandatory reporting state, doctors may still report, and they might even be required to report in virtue of various other professional or legal contracts that they have entered into. So professional liability insurance or some kind of an HMO agreement, or if they're part of a medical center, there are any number of other reasons why the doctor might need to report based on his or her professional entanglements, but a doctor may also feel compelled to report just from the standpoint of ethics and ethical requirements if he or she believes a patient to be an unsafe driver, or if he or she believes that a patient is suffering from some kind of a condition that might render them unsafe behind the wheel of a car. Today, however, I'm going to focus on one example of a mandatory reporting state, and that's the state of California. The state of California requires that doctors report, and not all states that have mandatory reporting have Alzheimer's show up on the list of conditions that it is mandatory to report. But California is one where not only are physicians required to report, but Alzheimer's disease is specifically mentioned in those statutes. Now, there's a couple of statutes, and as we move along, we'll kind of get more into that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go then to my screen share, and you can actually take a look at some of the forms, and I'll just kind of walk through what some of these requirements for doctors are. And it would be helpful even for people, I think, who are not physicians, because of the fact that you can at least get a better handle on the situation that your loved one may find him or herself in the event that a doctor does generate a report on your loved one. And if your loved one has received, or if you yourself have received a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, then you have to be aware in California your doctor is required to share that information with the local health officer. The local health officer then shares that information with the Department of Motor Vehicles, and at that point, the Department of Motor Vehicles, or DMV, is going to initiate a request back to the individual, and then there will be kind of an interchange between the individual, the doctor, and the DMV moving forward to determine what, if any, restrictions are appropriate and whether or not that person is safe to operate a motor vehicle and for how long. Now, even a person, I think, who is not a California resident might get some benefit out of this video because of the fact that it is going to be an indication of what a mandatory reporting state is like. There aren't that many of them. I think there's about 6 by my last count out of the 50 states and the District of Columbia. So 6 states out of 50, certainly not a majority. But in those states that do have mandatory reporting, this would be the process. And not only that, but even in states that do not have mandatory reporting, they will have a reporting process that is similar to the one we'll outline here, but let's get into it. So I want to draw your attention to AlzheimersProof.com. You can see the URL here at the top. The URL is Alzheimer's Proof, and it's an article that I did on the legality of driving with Alzheimer's disease titled, "Is it legal to drive with Alzheimer's disease?" And in that article, you can see a list of the 6 states where it apparently is currently required that physicians report certain impairments to whatever agency it is that deals with driver's licenses. And those 6 states presently, as far as I can tell, are California, Delaware, Nevada, New Jersey, Oregon, and Pennsylvania. 6 different states. Now let me go through a couple of things here. The first is in California. This is the Health and Safety Code in California. Health and Safety Code, and you can see here in Chapter 3, this is Division 102, Part 2, Chapter 3, and then the Section 103900 in paragraph A, and we read now, every physician and surgeon shall report immediately to the local health officer in writing the name, date of birth, and address of every patient at least 14 years of age or older whom the physician and surgeon has diagnosed as having a case of a disorder characterized by lapses of consciousness. The statute goes on and gives a couple of exceptions, but essentially the purport of this particular statute is disorders characterized by lapses of consciousness, and Alzheimer's is one of those diseases. You can see it here. The department, in cooperation with the Department of Motor Vehicles, shall define disorders characterized by lapses of consciousness based upon existing clinical standards for that definition for purposes of this section, and shall include Alzheimer's disease, you see it right here, and those related disorders that are severe enough to be likely to impair a person's ability to operate a motor vehicle in the definition. So when we're talking about the state of California, of course you see here, the state of California requires that physician's report. Now that particular piece of information was also disclosed in the Medical Board of California's newsletter, and you see here this is volume, if you can see it, volume 135 from the summer of 2015. On page 10, at least that is the pagination that is visible here on this PDF file, the question is, reporting lapses of consciousness, what is your legal responsibility? And this is by Linda Hill, who identifies herself as a medical doctor, among other designations. And in the second paragraph, we see, based on California Health and Safety Code Section 103900, the answer to the question posed in the initial paragraph is yes. The code states that every physician and surgeon shall notify the local health officer when they have diagnosed a patient with a disorder characterized by lapses of consciousness. So you can see that it is simply a restatement of what we just looked at. How would that reporting process proceed? Well, here you see a diagram that is available on, I just found it, you can see the URL here at the top, lacounty.gov, and the subdomain there is public health. So publichealth.lacounty.gov, and there is a document on there titled Physician and Surgeon Reporting of a Patient Diagnosed with a Disorder Characterized by Lapses of Consciousness. And just to kind of look at this diagram and get a fix, if we start on the left here in the red where it says physician and surgeon. All right, so just a word on the nomenclature. It looks like PMD can stand for private medical doctor or primary medical doctor. That's according to the acronym subdomain on the freedictionary.com, looking up the abbreviation PMD. All right, so going back here, the physician and surgeon, the primary medical doctor, and it reads, if that person diagnoses a patient as having a case of a disorder characterized by lapses of consciousness and no reporting exceptions are relevant, then the report is required. And you can see that red arrow going from the physician and surgeon to the local health officer. So apparently in California, somebody has designated a local health officer, and then that health officer in his or her jurisdiction of residence, JOR, receives the doctor's report and then submits it to the Department of Motor Vehicles. So you can see there now we're looking at the blue is the local health officer, then they create a report, the blue arrow, then the Department of Motor Vehicles receives the local health officer's report, and that person in the DMV then goes through a process that includes contacting, and you can see here the green arrow, the DMV contacts the person about whom the report was made, and presumably that is going to be, you can see there, the medical request. The person then is going to authorize his or her physician to do more detailed follow-up. And you can see that following through the green arrow, the DMV contacts the person who authorizes the doctor to disclose additional information to the DMV, at which point the second red arrow at the bottom is the submission of the information the DMV has requested back to the Department of Motor Vehicles. So quite an elaborate process there, but you can see on the bottom what the actual legal standing is for this, what the actual justification is from a legal standpoint. The statute requiring the report, HSC section 103900, and of course that we just saw is the Health and Safety Code, HSC, in California. Now there are a couple of documents that I was able to locate, and I'll draw your attention to them presently. The first is from the County of Los Angeles. You see here the Department of Public Health, and the title of this report is Physician and Surgeon Report to the Local Health Officer of a Patient Diagnosed with a Disorder Characterized by Lapses of Consciousness. And as we saw, that includes Alzheimer's disease. So this is the report that the physician or surgeon would make. Some medical practitioner is going to make this report to whoever it is that is designated the local health officer in the relevant jurisdiction. In this case, we're talking about the County of Los Angeles. Now, in Part 1, you see here in parentheses that this report is not sent to the DMV. This is sent from the physician to the local health officer. And it is a subset of this you see here is information required by the state. And that's going to include things like the patient's name, the actual diagnosis, the birth date of the patient, his or her age, their address so that they can be contacted, and so on. And then the information about the physician making the report. So the last, first name, the name of the physician's license number, you see here, the physician's address, phone number, and so on, and that's going to be signed. And then you can see here that the safety process requires that if the DMV needs more information, the DMV will contact the diagnosed person, and we already saw that in the previous diagram. And that person will be given instructions on how to directly authorize the physician to release the required medical information to the Department of Motor Vehicles so that department can process the report per the legal requirements in California. And you see here again, HSC 103900 is summarized or quoted as it is, as it were, on the third page, I guess this is. You can see the address that this is sent to, the Los Angeles County Health Officer. Once again, it's summarized, the legal requirements are summarized, and so on. If we also go, and here you can see that this is the Contra Costa Public Health Communicable Disease Program in Martinez, California. But this is also for the reporting of lapses of consciousness related conditions, including Alzheimer's disease. And here you can see they specify at the top the condition being reported, the patient's name and identifying contact information, home address, phone numbers, email if available, birth date, their age. Then interestingly here, their occupation. So now this, I don't know, it looks as if this might be the report that is actually generated from the local health officer, but because it differs from the previous report, and it includes a little bit of information that is extra, including the person's occupation. So for example, are they in the food service industry, daycare, healthcare? So there may be stricter requirements if the person with this condition. Now bear in mind that conditions characterized by lapses of consciousness can presumably include things beyond Alzheimer's disease. So obviously the focus of this website is Alzheimer's disease, and if we consider that many of the people who are suffering from Alzheimer's are seniors, then it is unlikely that a senior with Alzheimer's disease is also a daycare worker or a healthcare worker in the food service or school industry. However, other conditions that are characterized by lapses of consciousness, they may fully well have persons actively employed at younger ages who are dealing with these kinds of afflictions. So further down, you can see that the California driver's license or identification card number is required, and then more detailed information. So if the report is based on episodic lapses of consciousness, when was the most recent episode? If there have been multiple episodes in the past 3 years, indicate the dates. Presumably this is to try to gauge the periodicity. Further question, within the past 12 months, has there been an episode of loss of consciousness or control while driving? Are any additional lapses of consciousness likely to occur? If patient has had episodes of nocturnal seizures, is there a likelihood of lapses of consciousness occurring while he or she is awake? Question number 6 here. Has the patient been diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease? Would you currently advise this patient not to drive? Does the patient's condition represent permanent driving disability? And would you recommend a driving evaluation by the DMV? So this particular report, this confidential morbidity report, gets into a little bit more depth. You can see here it also references the same legal basis, the Health and Safety Code 103900. Here's a further form for the driver and the physician, and you can see here this is the driver medical evaluation form. And we see that the instructions for the driver indicate that the form is to be taken to the medical professional most familiar with your health history and current medical condition. So you're supposed to take this form as the driver. When they get this request, they're supposed to take it to their doctor, and it's supposed to be filled out in conjunction with a consultation with their medical professional. And in fact, it's the medical professional most familiar with your health history and your current medical condition. And then specific instructions to the medical professional saying that sections 5 through 13 are supposed to be completed. On pages 2 through 5, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the Department of Motor Vehicle records indicate your patient may have a condition that could affect the safe operation of a motor vehicle. And in this case, the department is concerned about the following condition, and presumably what is written after that colon there, concerned about the following condition in this blank, is going to be derived from the local health officer's report that was generated because of a physician diagnosis, possibly also because of a law enforcement officer's report, but we will pass over that for the time being. So in this case, section 1, completed driver information, first, last name, of course, driver's license number, again, date of birth, contact information, and then it says the driver must complete the health history, and you can see here head, neck, spinal injuries, seizures, dizziness, eye problems, nervous disorders, and then further on you see here nervous or psychiatric disorder, whether there's any permanent impairment, any major illness, any other disease or disorders. And in fact, this can actually, it's a fillable PDF, so you can see here in the various blanks, a person can check the various boxes and fill it out. Then they ask for an explanation, including onset date, diagnosis, any medication that has been prescribed, and the doctor who is actually treating. Then you need to sign it and date it. Once again, it specifies that the information is required, and it says it's required under the authority of Division 6 and 7 of the California Vehicle Code, and failure to provide the information is cause for refusal to issue a license or to withdraw the driving privilege. And it further tries to mitigate concerns about privacy by stating that all records relating to the physical or mental condition of any person are confidential and not open to public inspection. And then you can see there it references the California Vehicle Code, section 1808.5. And then you see the information for the medical professional. And here are sections 5 through 13. And we'll just kind of go through these quickly here. But you see the instructions. The first section 5 is vision. Are there any visual difficulties that the person is having? Section 6, treatment by other medical professionals. Section 7, treatment under your supervision under Section 7. So the diagnosis is going to be relevant. Do you need to see your patient at regular intervals? Is the condition improving or stable? Obviously for Alzheimer's, this is going to be a big deal. What stage a person's in. In early stage, they may still be able to do some driving. Obviously, by the time they get into late stage, they probably will have difficulty rising out of bed on their own. Information about how long the doctor has been seeing that particular patient, how often symptoms occur, what kinds of symptoms are in view, medications, and then would the side effects from medications interfere with the patient's ability to drive safely. So you can see that beyond Alzheimer's, there may be other conditions that suggest certain pharmaceutical interventions, certain medications that might have side effects that might prevent a person from driving a car correctly. And then you can see levels of functional impairment. Are they impaired maybe after a stroke? Right side, left side of the body? Or is their motor skill affected? But then section 9 is going to be, for the purposes of this channel, obviously the most relevant. And you can see in section 9, it's literally titled Dementia or Cognitive Impairments. And you can see here, obviously, Alzheimer's disease is the top one, or some other kind of dementia. So for instance,
Lewy body dementia, multi-infarct dementia, and so on. And then history of disease, results of testing, any relevant information the doctor would put in there. Using the definitions below, please rate the severity. So here you have a tripartite division of severity from mild. Mild is defined here as judgment is relatively intact, but work or social activities are significantly impaired. The ability to safely operate a motor vehicle may or may not be impaired. Moderate is defined as independent living is hazardous and some degree of supervision is necessary. The individual is unable to cope with the environment and driving would be dangerous. And by severe, the activities of daily living are so impaired that continual supervision is required. The person is incapable of driving a motor vehicle. And I've said this before, you can see here that the real sticky wicket is going to be the moderate stage. And in addition to that, it's going to be the transition between the mild stage and the moderate stage. There are additionally some questions that are going to further go into an assessment of the driver's ability to operate a motor vehicle. And you can see here a number of questions here: memory loss, depression, diminished judgment, impaired attention, impaired language skills, impaired visual spatial skills, impulse behavior, problem-solving deficits, loss of awareness of disability. And then they are able to check none or mild, moderate, severe, or uncertain for each of those. And each of those obviously is going to play a role in driving an automobile. So being able to remember what pedal is the accelerator and what is the brake, being able to remember the roads, being able to remember what road signs mean, being able to have not only impulse control, but a kind of an evenness to emotion is obviously something many drivers take for granted. Loss of awareness of their disability is going to be a problem. Problem-solving deficits if you get into a situation where you have to sort of think on the fly. Obviously, in a car, you're operating a 1-ton piece of metal that could do serious bodily injury or kill somebody. Is your attention impaired? You have diminished judgment. And you can see further all of the various different aspects of the questions. In section 10, lapses of consciousness. This is going to be other disorders that might likewise cause some kind of a difficulty, possibly through medication, some kind of an epileptic or seizure disorder. And there are many other kinds of neurological condition that might also be reported on this form. But you can see again, section number 9 is specifically geared towards dementia. There's a section for diabetes, and that's section 11. And once again, there is a focus on losses of consciousness, which is the main focus of all of this. And then there's a place for additional comments. And of course, you have the medical professional signature at the end, the attestation that all the information is correct and complete. One aspect of the reporting process that we really haven't gotten into up to this point has been the idea that somebody else other than a physician is, in some cases, able to report a driver. So if you look at the instructions here on the LA County website for the public health, you can see that there is a form that is available for use by a relative, friend, caregiver, vision specialist, court, or some other individual or entity that is able to begin the process to the local health officer, presumably of a possible reevaluation of an individual's ability to drive an automobile safely. This form is titled Request for Driver Reexamination. And you can see here, complete the form if you wish the Department of Motor Vehicles to reevaluate a driver's ability to drive safely. You give the name, you give your guess, I suppose, here, of the driver's condition. And you can see here, is it a medical condition? Is it a mental condition? Is it a weakness, confusion, alcohol dependency, blackout, seizures? Do they need help with daily activities? And a place to write in something else. Driver behavior. You could even sort of generate a report based on your observation of poor driving behaviors. For example, does not see or react to cars, drives in the wrong lane, drives on the wrong side of the road, acts in a violent or aggressive manner, and so on, and then use the space below to further elaborate on the various information that's being provided. Now at the end here, you see that you need to identify yourself either as a relative, a friend, a caregiver, vision specialist, court, or other. You can check if you would like to have your name kept confidential. Now, notice that confidentiality is not the same thing as anonymity. Unsigned reports will not be considered. So, for example, you can't just print out a copy of this form for somebody who cut you off in traffic, not sign it and expect that you're going to cause trouble for them in terms of an evaluation process. So confidentiality is one thing and anonymity is another, and they will not accept an anonymous report even though the report can be confidential. Finally, here at the back you can see that there are addresses given for places where you can take the form or you can mail it, and various different addresses are given depending on where you live. So you can see that you can either mail the form or you can take it directly to the offices.
I hope that something that I shared with you today was of value to you. If it was, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell to be alerted to new content as it becomes available. As I mentioned at the outset, I intend to get more in detail in terms of some of the other states, walk you through some of the other requirements, some of the other forms maybe for law enforcement, for doctors, for family and other caretakers and other individuals who might be in a position to have to file a report. We'll get more in detail into that. And I'll also cover some of the other states that have mandatory reporting, as well as some states that do not, and sort of walk you through a bit as to how the procedure would go in those states. But for the time being, I thank you so much for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video. Thank you.